I now move on to the exemplars of the Hebrew Bible preserved for us at the caves at Qumran near the Dead Sea, where the so-called Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. In the winter of 1946 or 1947, it depends on which side of January 1st it was on, 3 shepherds threw a stone in a hole in a cliff, and they heard pottery break. They investigated and discovered the first of what are called the Dead Sea Scrolls. Later, these were authenticated, and the site was excavated, and many more sectarian and biblical documents were found, though the earliest ones were actually some of the best ones. And so a chance toss of a stone resulted in the greatest find in biblical history. You can see here how the caves look, and it's up here in the northern part of the Dead Sea that these caves were discovered. They were discovered in 1947, and they represent the oldest extant fragments of the Old Testament scriptures. Included among them is a complete Isaiah scroll, 1Q Isaiah A, but it also has fragments of every other book except for the book of Esther. And what's really important about this is that these Dead Sea Scrolls are about 1,000 years older than the Masoretic texts that we had available heretofore, dating anywhere from the 3rd century BC to AD 70. And it can be used in correcting the Masoretic text at certain points. For example, in a kind of important passage, Isaiah 53, the suffering servant passage, one of the Masoretic reading is, from the travail of his soul, he will see it and be satisfied, though the Hebrew is a little bit awkward. But the Masoretic text has been corrected by some versions, at least, on the basis of the Dead Sea Scroll, supported, by the way, by the Septuagint, that from the travail of his soul he will see light, the little word or in Hebrew, and be satisfied. And so some Bible translations on the basis of this Dead Sea Scroll reading have corrected the Masoretic text and added the word light here. In a broad way, the Dead Sea Scrolls preserve the reliability of the Masoretic tradition. David Clark wrote an article that helped demonstrate that a number of years ago, back in Bible Translator 1984. He took the first of the published Dead Sea Scrolls, which was the Isaiah scroll, and compared it to the Masoretic text in some detail. And he also compared it to the translations that were starting to use the Dead Sea Scrolls for text critical purposes. And this is what he discovered. He pointed out that there are some 1,403 variations in 1Q Isaiah A and the Masoretic text. Now, at first this might seem a little alarming. That seems like a lot of variations. But a lot of them were simply spelling variations, kind of like in English you can spell the word honor in English, H-O-N-O-R, but if you're in England you would spell it H-O-N-O-U-R. You have some spelling variations, plain A and defective spellings of words, is for those of you that know Hebrew. And so a lot of them are trivial. So when the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia, the scholarly edition of the Hebrew Bible, came out, they incorporated some 291 variations among those 1,403. The other ones they consider trivial and didn't bother to mention. Of that 291, one of 8 modern translations that utilize Dead Sea Scroll materials used 113 of them. Now, what Clark compared was translations in English, German, and French, the Revised Standard Version, the New English Bible, a French Bible, the Traduction Œcuménique, the NIV, the Jerusalem Bible in French, the Tanakh, which is a Jewish translation, a German translation, the Nachricht, the Good News, and another French version, and some 113 of the readings were used in either the text or the margin of those 8 translations that utilized Dead Sea Scroll materials. But of those, only 40 were used in more than one. Particularly the New English Bible loved to use the Dead Sea Scroll variations, and there's quite a few places where it is the only translation that thought it worth mentioning that a Dead Sea Scroll reading was different. So only 40 was used in more than one of the 8, and only 9 used in the majority, 5 of the 8. And so in the end of the day, it actually helps to confirm the Masoretic text. Or as Clark puts it in his own words, we've already seen that only 9 out of over 1,400 variations in the Dead Sea Scroll text of Isaiah have commended themselves to a wide spectrum of recent scholarly translators in 3 major European languages. This is a remarkable vindication of the general reliability of the Masoretic text, and is a source of encouragement for the vast majority of Old Testament translators who are not equipped to undertake independent evaluation of textual problems, but accept the Masoretic tradition as their normal base. In other words, we probably need to change about 9 or so words. The consensus, at least, is that we should change about 9 words in 66 chapters, and given that there's, between the texts that we've been translating and the Dead Sea Scrolls, you have 1,000 years of copying and recopying. That's a rather remarkable feat. Well, let me move on to the next most important exemplar of the text, and that's in the versions. A version is like a translation. And the most important version is what is called the Septuagint. It's the early translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek. And it's important for a number of reasons. It's the source of most of the New Testament quotations of the Old Testament. It became the Old Testament of the early Gentile church, most of whom were Greek-speaking. And it, for scholars, is a basis for correcting, at certain points, the Masoretic text in textual criticism. I should mention that even today, the Septuagint is the primary Old Testament of the Greek Orthodox Church. They consider it more authoritative than the Hebrew text, it would seem. One place where this comes into play in your Bibles is the NIV at Genesis 4:8. Which corrects the Masoretic texts based on the Septuagint, supported by other early witnesses, the Samaritan, the Vulgate, and the Syriac. The traditional reading says, Cain said to his brother Abel, but these versions, the Septuagint and the Samaritan and the Vulgate and the Syriac, add an expression, Cain said to his other brother Abel, let us go out into the field. And so the NIV has adopted that alternative reading. Now here is an example of a very old Septuagint fragment, Duke Papyrus 740. It dates to the 4th century, and it has a few verses out of Psalm 89. We'll continue our discussion of the Septuagint and other versions in the next video.